Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, March the 21st, 2024. We've been looking at that passage from Mark 13 that was our gospel reading this past Sunday, all about the signs of the end times, the wars and rumors of wars and nations rising up and earthquakes and famines but that after all that, this is just the beginning of the birth pang. So my sermon theme was, it's from Churchill's famous saying from World War II. It's not the end. It's not the beginning of the end, but perhaps it's the end of the beginning. Certainly, in light of the fact that some 2,000 years have passed by, that's certainly true for us. But I want to go a little bit further in that reading, starting in verse 28, where Jesus says, "From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. And so also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." We're in that time of year where we're kind of moving, about to move into spring, and we're starting to see things are warming up, and the grass is turning a little bit green, and as time goes on, but it's also a kind of a one step forward, two steps back sometimes. Former parishioner in Ohio said they just got snow in the last couple of days, and it's gotten really warm here, and then it's got really chilly again, and I'll hear birds that I normally associate with springtime and heading into summer, and then all of a sudden again we get a cold snap. So it's kind of a difficult thing to understand. I thought I'd share with what New Testament professor Donald Jewell, who taught at Luther Seminary, wrote about this particular passage. These verses. He writes, the passage. The signs of the end will be as obvious as the signs of summer, he writes. Once again, nature furnishes the imagery. When trees begin to put out foliage, it's obvious that summer is at hand. Likewise, when the tribulations that Jesus predicted begin to occur, the end is near. The signs will be unambiguous, he says. And like other natural images that Jesus has employed, seed time and harvest, small seeds and large shrubs, birth pangs and delivery, there is inevitability about what must occur. However oppressive the times, deliverance is certain. The promise that follows has intrigued commentators since earliest times. This generation will not pass away before all these things take place, Jesus says. What can be meant by the words? Albert Schweitzer, he says, insisted that Jesus meant what he said, that he believed that the end of history was imminent, that Jesus went to Jerusalem convinced that God would bring the age to an end, and he died disappointed, according to Schweitzer. Christians who believe that Jesus was raised from the dead might at least concede that Jesus was surprised by the details of what God had in mind. There's some evidence to suggest, writes Jewell, that Jesus' followers understood his words to mean that the end of all things was imminent. Paul, for example, Apostle Paul believed that the end of history was not far off. It would certainly occur within his own lifetime. John, the seer who wrote Revelation, certainly did not believe that the world would continue for long. It's possible that Paul and these other Christians misunderstood Jesus. It's reasonable to wonder exactly what Jesus had in mind, but the fact is we probably cannot know. We can ask how these words are to be understood in Mark. Did the evangelist understand himself and his contemporaries to be a part of this generation, quote unquote, that would witness the termination of history? There's an indication in our chapter that Mark believed the end to be near at hand, that the destruction of Jerusalem would signal the beginning of the end. There's other indications that the chapter intends to dampen enthusiasm, preparing for a time of tribulations prior to the coming of the end. The end is not yet. These things are but the beginning of the birth pangs. Whether or not Mark believed the end was imminent, the fulfillment of Jesus' promise that some in this generation will see these things taking place is located in part in what follows. Jesus himself appears before the Sanhedrin and the governor. Judas, an insider and brother, hands Jesus over to death. The sun is turned to darkness while Jesus hangs on the cross. These fulfillments do not mark the end, but they demonstrate that Jesus' words are to be trusted. While heaven and earth will disintegrate, Jesus' promises will stand forever. Mark, he says, has taken great pains to stress Jesus' foreknowledge of what will happen to him and his disciples. 3 times he predicts his suffering and death. On 5 occasions he speaks of his resurrection. The detailed fulfillment of these prophecies provides a basis for trusting Jesus' predictions about the more distant future, predictions that hold promise for the faithful. In this regard, says Jewell, the discourse in chapter 13 is much like the parables in chapter 4. If you remember, chapter 4 has the parables of the sower, of the growing seed that it grows. You don't realize what's happening until it grows. The parable of the mustard seed. So he's making a connection here between chapter 13 and chapter 4 about the seeds, in the sense of offering hope, writes Jewell, in the face of disappointment. While there will be many tribulations that threaten the faithful, those who endure will be saved, just as the seed, though threatened by hazards, will produce an abundant harvest. And so it's a mystery. It's one that we can't understand fully, certainly not at this point in time. But I guess I'm thinking about, the weather and seeing just here in the past, couple of weeks how it gets warm and then it gets cold. So yeah, there's signs, but not definitive. We're not there yet. And I think that's what Jesus is alluding to here. It's all about these things are going to happen. But what Professor Jewell brings out, which I think is so critical here, is that the ultimate promise is not so much, because we're going to go on to, in verse 32, that no one knows the day or the hour. But the thing is not knowing when it's going to happen, but it's the assurance, the hope, the promise that what Jesus is talking about, what God has planned, is going to happen. We don't know when, don't know how, but it is going to happen. We could trust that, and we could, as Jesus goes on to say, what we'll be talking about in the next few days, what do you do in the meantime? Well, that'll be the question for the next several days. So hope you have a great day today. We'll continue exploring this passage tomorrow and on finishing up on Saturday. Until then, take care. Bye.